If I had to choose just one plugin to use on drums, this would be it. All right, today I want to tell you about what plugin I would choose if I could only choose one plugin to use on drums and why I choose it. I bet it's not what you think it will be. Just one plugin, not two, not three, one single plugin to use on the entire drum kit. So click subscribe and let's jump into this video. Okay, so we got a session up now with some drums that I recorded a while back, and let's just have a quick listen. They sound great, I think. It was recorded live, so you can hear a little bit of the band in the background, so it's kind of fun. So let's pull up my Desert Island plugin and see what it is. The one plugin I would use if I had to choose one for an entire drum kit. We're gonna throw it on the drum bus to start and just see how that goes. So my Desert Island plugin for drums is, drum roll please, Fabfilter Saturn 2. I love this thing. It's such a beast, but wait, isn't this a distortion plugin? Yes, it definitely is. Saturn is a multi-band distortion plugin that can take drums from sounding like this to this. Which essentially sounds like it's in a stadium instead of a room, and I love that for this. That crazy change in drum sound, which was way more sustained and like anthemic and glued together and just groovy, was one instance of this plugin. So let's jump into a couple examples of how I actually use Saturn 2 on drums. We'll start with the drum bus. Okay, so I've got my drum bus here. We're pulling up Saturn 2, and I'm just gonna zero it out right into default settings out of the box. So it's worth noting that the default settings of Saturn 2 will actually make a difference just on their own without even changing any of the settings, because the drive knob down here is actually already set to 20% by default. You can change that if you want, but I don't mind it. I think it's a good starting place actually. So let's start by just turning up the drive globally, which means that we're not going to be splitting it into a multi-band situation. We're just going to have it playing globally across the entire frequency band. So pair that, and let's crank up the drive, and you'll see how Saturn what Saturn does. You'll see what Saturn does. Turning it back down. And bypassing it off. Back on. So it gets pretty grimy. Obviously, when I pushed it really far, the like low end and the bass got really messed up. So what I would usually do is actually split it into a few bands. So I like to kind of isolate my low end and then a certain area of my mid-range as well. And let's start with looking at this mid-range. And that's what I'm going to probably drive the hardest. And again, everything is flat other than this built-in 20% that is kind of applied to all of them. You can turn that down or up as you want. So we're going to start with the mid-range here. And you can turn it on and off with this little button down on the left. So you can immediately see that you can actually push it pretty far when you've got the right band selected. This doesn't really destroy the whole drum kit because I'm only doing it to a certain frequency range. And I actually kind of like it. That's probably a little farther than I want to go, but let's keep running with it. Okay, that's sounding pretty fun. Now let's jump into our low end band. And you can solo the band you're listening to up here by clicking the S, or you can mute it out, or if you want, you can disable the processing on that individual band. Let's start turning our drive up on our low end band. So that's obviously way too far. That's kind of cool, still pretty grimy, but it's got a vibe. That's heavy. Let's turn it off. So the kick sounds so different. It's kind of like scooped and modern and gets much more like thumpy when I turn on Saturn on that low end band again. So off and then on. I like it. I like it a lot. Now, check this out. There's still way more we can do. So just by gaining up that channel a little bit, it's kind of squeezing a little differently. Really digging that. And now one of my other favorite features of this plugin is the dynamics knob down here. This thing is insane. It transforms your drums. We can turn it to the right, and that is going to increase our sustain and pretty much squeeze dynamics out, or we can turn it to the left, and it actually somehow creates decay, so we can make drums tighter. And this is hugely powerful. So let's check it out on the kick drum for a starting point, because you'll really hear it and how it changes the entire drum sound with just one knob. A little goes a long way, but I'll be a little dramatic so you can really hear the difference. So I'm going to crank it up and make the sustain longer. Now let's shorten it. Longer. Now let's try that on like the snare. I think I'm going to widen this up to make it a little more obvious, get more of the snare drum into this channel, and check this out. That's like such a stadium long decay snare now, which is overkill, of course, but it shows you how powerful it is. Now let's try shortening the snare. Whoa. That's crazy. It's so different. So this is back where we started. Bring the gain down a little. It's a little more sustained there. I'm going to lengthen the kick just barely too. All right, really digging how that sounded. Let's bypass the plugin on and off. So we'll start with it off. This is the drums as we originally heard them. Sounds great. Let's turn it on. Awesome. Maybe a little thumpy on the kick, so I can just kind of narrow down our mid-range that we really crushed band, because this band's pretty much being left alone, and then also bring our low band down even further to avoid the higher upper harmonics of the kick drum. There we go. So obviously more distorted, more crushed, but way more glued. I think it sounds really cool. And I am a believer that sometimes things that sound ugly soloed are perfect in the mix. Distortion is kind of the example of that, I feel like. Okay, so now we're going to bring in the rest of the instruments. I think I'll leave the vocals out just so we can really hear what's going on, but this will give us some context so we can really hear what's happening. How something sounds soloed is really of no importance because it's all about how the song sounds as a whole. So I think testing in context is really kind of everything. So by bringing in the bass and guitars and stuff, we're going to see how the drums now glue the song together. We'll start with it off and then I'll bring it in. Saturn bypassed, here we go. Back in. That sounds killer. Yeah, I'm a big fan. Kick is maybe just a little forward now, but I'm sure if we were spending the actual time to mix this song right now, we'd be able to correct that, no problem. Overall, this is definitely making things more glued together and just more exciting sounding to me. But I can hear you asking, what about if this was just the only plugin I could use on the drum kit and I had to start from scratch? That is a good question. These drums sound great already, and I'm just using Saturn to excite them and glue them together, which is actually how I usually do use Saturn. That is my primary use case. I don't try to mix entire drum kits with just this one plugin. But I said that if I had to choose one, I probably would. So let's try and quickly do that. All right, so I've gone back and pulled up an earlier mix session from the song, but removed all of the processing on the drums. So now we're just starting with the drums as they were recorded. To give you the full picture, we did process these drums on the way in with some compression and EQ. They were recorded by a professional session drummer, Lucas McKinnon, and we recorded them at Barnhouse Sound in Qualicum, BC, which is a beautiful studio. But other than that, these drums are as tracked and edited. This is going to be a bit of a speed mix because I can't spend as much time on this video as I would on a normal mix for a client, but I think it's still going to be pretty awesome. And we're using just Saturn, the one plugin. All right, let's jump into it. I'm going to start with the kick. And I've got that soloed here. I think we might have gated this even, but let's find out. Yeah, we're ducking some stuff there. Okay, so I'm going to go after this mid-range here. These are kind of like EQ curves inside of the bands. And we can use a mix knob. Okay. Different. Not sure I like it, but let's keep moving. Let's bring in the snare. Snare sounds pretty cool already. Okay. But, okay, I'm just going to try a global boost on this. And some sustain. That's cool. I think we're going to need to dial that sustain back on that kick. Overheads are going to be the trickiest thing, I think, because they're not my first, like distortion isn't the first thing I reach for with overheads, generally. Wow. Okay, that's really cool. It's almost like I can make it, I can change the size of the room with one knob. So tiny, mid-sized room. So that makes the room sound tiny, where this makes the room sound huge. Go back to center where we recorded it. Wow, I might lean it a little heavier. So far things are coming together really well. I think I'm going to try and bring in my close set of rooms first. So this would have been a stereo Bloomline ribbon pair, I think, in front of the kit. So I like what that's doing, but it's just creating a little too much sizzle, so I'm going to bring that, make a new band in the higher frequencies and just like turn that right down and drive. Might be losing a little too much dynamics, so I'm just going to dial the mix back. Yeah, that's a lot of energy. Bringing it down a little. I've got volume automation already written in here. Great. Okay, far room. Let's solo that. That is obviously already crashed. We don't need Saturn on that, but let's see what we can do anyways, because I bet we can make it seem less destroyed. So say we wanted to try and repair this and make it a little more dynamic and less just a tube of audio. So that's really cool. That lets me dial it way back so that it's really just like the kick, the snare, kick, snare. And then I can kind of crush it again, but without bringing all of that like in-between garbage back in. So it just becomes like a really good kick and snare reinforcer, I think. I'd like it a lot. Okay, awesome. We can try bringing some hi-hat in here. So I've separated my hi-hat in editing to have my closed hi-hat on one track and my open on another track. And this is where we can bring Saturn in, I think. So I'll load up Saturn on our open hi-hat. Now we're getting a lot of snare. So I'm going to make a band that kind of has that snare locked in there. Experimenting with dynamics to see what that does. Not a lot. So there's a middle ground there to removing the snare if I want that to happen. I could also turn down this band entirely or mute it. So that greatly reduces the snare in that channel. So bypass and kick and then bring it back in. Much more just hi-hat. But I don't think I'm going to mind some of that signal in there. I think it'll sound more natural if I let it live. Could be argued that I don't even need that hi-hat track. The overheads are doing a really good job at that. Okay, so up next is toms. I know there's some tom action right at the top of the song. Sounds great. So let's get Saturn on both of them. We'll start looking at our rack tom here first. Gonna crank some sustain. And I like distortion on toms. And down to our second tom. Okay, so we need some more attack on that. We're gonna start by cranking our drive. And then I'm gonna come up here, get like around 6K inside of this, go up to 7, and I'm gonna boost this a little bit. Probably a little bit much. There we go. That sounded really good, I think. Now, that is just our tom mics. Snare actually sounds frighteningly good, but we're not going to want all that bleed and stuff. So, unfortunately, there's no gate plugin option for me on this song because I'm only using Saturn. But I could manually clean things and probably get away with something usable. If you want a video on how I use gates to clean my toms automatically, let me know in the comments. There we go. That's going to fade just fine, I think, once we duck that in with our other mics. Okay, I want some more attack up here. That sounds pretty good. And now we can do our Saturn on the drum bus for our glue. All right, let's A/B it. Saturn off on drums. Saturn on drums. The kick is kind of a disaster, I'll admit, but everything else is awesome, I think. I actually really love it. I think that if I just did some work on that kick, probably without Saturn, this would be a killer drum sound in itself. Very happy with this. This was kind of a test. I hadn't ever tried to just use one plugin on drums before, but I stand by my decision. Saturn is my desert island plugin, and if I had to choose one plugin for drums, this would definitely be it. I'm very happy with this. Honestly, the more I play with this plugin, the more I wonder if this isn't my desert island plugin for everything. It's so versatile. Let me know in the comments if you want me to do more Desert Island plugin videos on different instruments, and if you like these kind of quick tip videos as well. As always, don't forget to give a thumbs up below and click subscribe. And if you want to see how I use even more distortion on vocals, watch this video.